The blood trail had gone cold an hour ago, but Jessa Pratt could still smell the fugitive's terror hanging in the air like smoke from green wood, acrid and sharp enough to make her eyes water. She crouched beside a stream where the man had tried to wash away his scent, her broad nostrils flaring as she sorted through the layers of information most trackers would miss. Old fear from 3 days back when he first ran, fresh panic from this morning when he realized how close she was, and underneath it all the sour reek of guilt that had probably driven him to theft in the first place. Her commanding officer had hired her because she could do this, could follow a man across 50 miles of wilderness by the smell of his terror alone. But he had never invited her to share a meal with the rest of the patrol, and the coins he paid her were always dropped on a stump rather than handed over. She was good at what she did, and she was always alone. The wind shifted, bringing something entirely different across the water. Jessa's head snapped up, her small tusks catching the afternoon light as her lips parted slightly. Bread. Fresh bread, the kind that came from an oven still hot, with a crust that crackled and a soft interior that probably steamed when you tore it open. The scent carried none of the usual human smells she associated with settlements. No fear or suspicion, or the particular sharp anxiety people gave off when they saw her green skin and reached for weapons. Just bread, warm and certain and utterly without malice. She stood slowly, the fugitive's trail forgotten as completely as if it had never existed. Her leather scout's gear creaked softly as she turned toward the source of that impossible smell, her pack settling against her shoulders. Somewhere behind her, the thief was probably still running, his fear leaving a path bright as paint to anyone with her gift. The patrol would be furious when she returned empty-handed. They might not hire her again. Jessa started walking toward the bread anyway. The mill came into view as she crested a low rise, a sturdy stone building perched beside a fork in the stream where the water ran fast and clear over smooth rocks. The wheel turned steadily, and she could hear the rumble of the grinding stones even from a distance. A smaller building sat adjacent, connected by a covered walkway, and from its chimney rose a thin stream of smoke that carried that devastating scent of fresh bread directly to where she stood, rooted like a tree. She had smelled bread before, of course. Bread was common, bread was everywhere. Bread was what humans ate when they had nothing better. But she had always smelled it mixed with other things, with the fierce sweat of bakers who locked their doors when she approached, with the anger of villagers who thought her kind should starve, with the particular bitter scent of people who would rather burn food than share it with an orc. This bread smelled like none of those things. This bread smelled the way safety was supposed to smell, if safety had ever been something Jessa could have. She walked down the rise without meaning to, her feet choosing the path while her mind was still caught on that scent. The mill yard was clean and well kept, with a vegetable garden on one side and a small chicken coop on the other. The hens clucked softly as she passed, unafraid in a way that made her chest tight. Animals always knew. Animals could smell predators, could sense danger, and these chickens were pecking at the ground like she was nothing more threatening than a passing cloud. The door to the bakehouse was open, probably to let out the heat of the ovens. Jessa stopped in the doorway, her eyes adjusting to the dimmer interior, and saw him. He was human, tall enough that he had to duck slightly beneath the oven hood, with dark hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck where sweat had dampened it. His sleeves were rolled up past his elbows, and his forearms were dusted with flour that had settled into the dark hair there like snow on winter branches. He was pulling a long paddle from the oven, and on it were 4 perfect loaves of bread, their crusts golden brown and split along the top where steam had forced its way out during baking. He turned to set them on the cooling rack and saw her standing there. Jessa tensed, waiting for the smell of fear to hit her like it always did, waiting for him to shout or reach for a weapon or simply freeze the way rabbits froze when they knew the wolf had found them. She had her hands visible and empty, her posture as non-threatening as she could make it, but it never mattered. Fear had its own logic, and humans feared orcs the way they feared fire or flood. The man looked at her for a long moment, his dark eyes traveling from her face to her travel-stained clothes to the bow and quiver strapped across her back. Then he said, "You are going to want to let those cool for at least 10 minutes before you try to eat one, or you will burn your mouth." Jessa blinked. The smell coming from him was not fear. It was not even caution. It was mostly just sweat and flour and the faint scent of old smoke that clung to him like a shadow, and underneath that a kind of tired sadness that had nothing to do with her. "I am sorry," she said, her voice coming out rougher than she meant it to. "I smelled your bread. I should not have come." "Why not?" He set the paddle aside and wiped his hands on a cloth that hung from his belt. "It is a public road. The mill is open to anyone who needs flour ground. I sell bread to travelers when I have extra. I am an orc. I have eyes." He said it without particular emphasis, the way he might have noted that the sky was blue or the stream was running fast. "Do you have coin?" Jessa fumbled for her purse, confused enough that her fingers were clumsy on the strings. She had coin. The patrol paid her well for her tracking, even if they would not share a fire with her. She pulled out 2 silver pieces and held them up, unsure of the going rate for bread, but hoping it would be enough. The man's eyebrows rose. "That will buy you every loaf I bake today and most of tomorrow's batch besides. 1 copper for a loaf, 2 if you want butter." "I want." Jessa stopped, unsure what she wanted. The bread, obviously, but also to stay in this place that smelled like safety in the presence of this man who looked at her like she was simply a customer who had wandered in off the road. 1 loaf, with butter. He nodded and selected one from the rack, testing it with his fingers even though he had said to let them cool. Apparently satisfied, he took it to a work table and cut it in half with a knife that looked well used and carefully maintained. He spread butter on both halves with practiced efficiency, the yellow cream melting into the bread's warmth, and then wrapped 1 half in clean cloth and handed it to her. "The other half?" Jessa asked. "For me. I have not eaten since sunrise and I am hungry." He bit into his portion, and Jessa watched the way his eyes closed briefly in satisfaction. Not a prideful expression, just the simple pleasure of eating something good after hard work. She raised her own portion to her mouth and bit down. The crust crackled between her teeth, giving way to the soft interior that was everything she had imagined from the scent alone. The butter was rich and faintly salty, soaking into the bread's texture. She made a sound she had not meant to make, something between a hum and a sigh, and when she opened her eyes, the man was watching her with an expression she could not read. "Good?" he asked. "Yes." She took another bite, forcing herself to eat slowly even though every instinct said to devour it before someone could take it away. "Very good." They ate in silence for a while, standing in the warm bakehouse with the afternoon sun slanting through the open door. Jessa could hear the mill wheel turning, the chickens clucking outside, the stream running over its rocks. Normal sounds, peaceful sounds. The kind of sounds that had nothing to do with tracking fugitives through the wilderness or sleeping alone in scout camps while the human soldiers huddled together for warmth. "What is your name?" the man asked when they had both finished eating. "Jessa Pratt." "Nathan Czar." He held out his hand, and after a moment she took it. His palm was warm and calloused, and he shook her hand the way he might have shaken any customer's, with simple courtesy. You are a long way from the main road. I am tracking someone. The fugitive's trail came back to her mind, cold now, probably impossible to follow after so much time had passed. She would have to return to the patrol and admit she had lost him. They would be angry. They might not pay her. She discovered she did not care as much as she should have. A dangerous someone, Nathan asked. Not particularly. A thief. He stole from the garrison supply wagons and ran. She met his eyes. I can smell fear from a mile away. It makes me good at tracking, but he is long gone now. Nathan absorbed this information with the same calm he had shown when she appeared in his doorway. A useful gift for a scout. Yes. Jessa hesitated, then added, Your bread smells like peace. I have never smelled that before. That is why I followed it. Something shifted in Nathan's expression, too quick for her to catch and classify. He turned away, busying himself with banking the oven fire. It is just bread, he said quietly. Flour and water and yeast and salt, nothing special. But it was special, Jessa thought. It was special because he had made it without fear, in this place where even the chickens were not afraid, and for a few minutes she had been able to stand in that peace and eat her share of it like she belonged there. I should go, she said, though her feet did not move toward the door. The patrol will be looking for you, eventually. When they realize I am not coming back with the fugitive. Nathan glanced at the sky through the open door, judging the angle of the sun with practiced ease. You have perhaps 2 hours of good light left. Not enough to pick up a cold trail and follow it anywhere useful. No, Jessa agreed. Then you might as well stay for supper. I have stew that has been cooking since morning and more bread than I can eat myself. He said it casually, like it was a normal thing to invite an orc scout to share a meal, like people did it all the time. Jessa's throat felt tight. Why? Because you followed the smell of bread instead of the smell of fear, Nathan said, meeting her eyes. That seems like a choice worth rewarding. So she stayed. The stew was rabbit and vegetables, thick and well seasoned, served in wooden bowls with chunks of bread for soaking up the broth. They ate at a small table in the mill house, where Nathan apparently lived in a couple of spare rooms behind the grinding floor. The space was clean and spare, with a narrow bed in one corner and a shelf of books in another. A few dishes, a few pots, everything needed for one person to live simply and well. You run the mill alone? Jessa asked between bites of stew. Yes, it was my family's once. My father and uncle ran it together and my mother kept the books. My sister and I were supposed to take over eventually. He tore a piece of bread in half, watching the steam rise from it. There was a fire. 5 years ago, the old bakehouse burned and my mother and sister were inside. The sadness she had smelled on him earlier made sense now. It was old grief, worn smooth by time but never entirely gone, settled into him like the smoke scent that clung to his clothes even though he must have washed them 100 times since then. I am sorry, Jessa said. So was I. I sold the land in town and moved the mill operation out here, away from everything. Built a new bakehouse with stone instead of wood. Learned to bake the way my mother had, because I could not stand the thought of bread coming from anywhere else. He smiled slightly, though it did not reach his eyes. For a long time I only baked enough for myself. Then I started selling to the occasional traveler who came by for milling. It is a living. Lonely, Jessa said without thinking. Nathan looked at her, and this time his smile was real if small. Yes, but so is tracking fugitives for people who will not eat with you. They finished the meal in companionable silence. Jessa helped him wash the dishes, awkward at first because she was not used to domestic tasks, but Nathan did not comment on her clumsiness. When the work was done, he walked her out to the mill yard where the last of the daylight was fading into dusk. Thank you, Jessa said. for the bread and the stew, and for not being afraid." "Thank you for choosing bread over fear," Nathan replied. "That is not a small thing." Jessa nodded and turned to go, heading back toward the rise where she had first smelled his bread. She made it perhaps 20 steps before she stopped and looked back. Nathan was still standing in the mill yard watching her leave, and the smoke from his chimney rose straight up into the still evening air. "I might come back," she called, "if that would be acceptable." "I bake 3 times a week," Nathan called back. "Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays." "You would not want to come on the off days. The bread is never as fresh." Jessa felt something unfamiliar bloom in her chest, warm and tentative as spring's first shoots. She raised her hand in acknowledgement, and then turned and jogged into the gathering dark, following the cold trail of the fugitive's fear back toward the patrol and the inevitable questions about why she had returned empty-handed. She did not care. She would be back on Thursday. The patrol commander was a thick-shouldered man named Garrett who had hired Jessa for her skills and never once invited her to warm herself at the fire. He listened to her report about losing the fugitive's trail with a face like stone, then paid her half the agreed-upon sum and told her not to expect future work if she could not deliver results. Jessa took the coins and left without argument. She had enough saved to last through winter if she was careful, and spring would bring other work, other patrols who needed trackers and did not ask too many questions about what species did the tracking. She made camp a mile from the patrol's site, built a small fire, and ate dried meat while watching the stars wheel overhead. Thursday came with clear skies and a wind from the south that promised warmer weather. Jessa broke camp at dawn and made her way back to the mill, following the stream because it was easier than trying to navigate by landmarks she barely remembered. The mill wheel was turning when she arrived, and she could hear the rumble of the grinding stones, which meant Nathan was working. She waited in the yard until the noise stopped, unsure of the etiquette for interrupting a miller at work. The chickens recognized her this time, or at least did not startle when she approached, and one bold hen came over to investigate her boots with the air of someone inspecting a visitor's credentials. Nathan emerged from the mill house with flour dust in his hair and a surprised expression that shifted quickly into something that might have been pleasure. "You came back. You said Thursdays were baking days, so I did." He brushed flour from his hands, the white powder falling like snow onto the dark earth. "The bread is just coming out of the oven now. You have good timing." They fell into an easy pattern. Jessa bought a loaf. Nathan cut it in half and buttered both portions, and they ate together in the warm bakehouse while the rest of the day's loaves cooled on their racks. Afterward, Jessa helped him carry full sacks of flour from the mill to the bakehouse storage, work that required muscle more than skill, and Nathan accepted her help with the same calm courtesy he showed everything else. "Where do you live when you are not tracking fugitives?" he asked as they worked. "Wherever I make camp. Sometimes I rent a room in a town if I have had good work, but most innkeepers do not like renting to orcs." Jessa hoisted another sack onto her shoulder, barely feeling the weight. "It is easier to stay in the wilderness." "You could stay here," Nathan said. "There is a storage shed that I do not use much. It has a good roof and 4 walls. You could clear it out and sleep there when you are between jobs." Jessa set down the sack she was carrying, her heart doing something complicated in her chest. "You would allow that. Why not? You work hard, you pay for your bread, and you are the first person in 5 years who has come here just because the place smelled peaceful." He met her eyes. "I would welcome the company if you wanted to stay sometimes." So she did. The shed became hers over the course of several weeks. She cleared out the old tools and broken equipment, swept the floor, and made a pallet from straw and wool blankets she bought in the nearest village. It was not much, but it was hers, and it was attached to a place where she was welcome. She started timing her travels to bring her back to the mill on baking days, and then she started staying for 2 days instead of 1, helping Nathan with the heavy work of running a mill and bakehouse alone. They did not talk much at first. Nathan was a man of silences, comfortable with long stretches of quiet broken only by the sounds of work. But gradually, as the weeks turned into months, they began to share more. He told her about his childhood in the town, about learning to read using his mother's recipe books, about the day he realized he could not go back to the place where his family had died. She told him about growing up in an orc settlement on the frontier, about discovering her gift for smelling emotions when she was barely old enough to walk, about the loneliness of being useful but never quite welcome anywhere she went. "Does it hurt?" Nathan asked one evening as they sat outside the mill house watching the sun set over the stream. Smelling fear all the time, Jessa considered the question. It is like any other sense, you learn to live with it. But yes, sometimes it hurts. Especially when the fear is directed at you, and you know you have done nothing to earn it except exist. "I am sorry," Nathan said quietly. "You do not smell like fear," Jessa pointed out. "Even that first day, when I appeared in your doorway looking like every human's nightmare of what an orc raider should be, you just offered to sell me bread." "I was more afraid of the oven fire than I was of you," Nathan admitted. "Fire still makes me nervous. I have to force myself to light the ovens every time, even now." Jessa looked at him more closely, noticing for the first time the way he always stood a little too far back from the oven, the way he flinched slightly when he opened the door to check on the bread. "But you do it anyway." "Someone has to bake the bread," Nathan said simply. Winter came, and with it the first real test of their arrangement. The stream froze at its edges, and snow fell thick enough to make travel difficult. Jessa had taken a job with a merchant caravan that needed a scout to watch for bandits on the North Road, but she had made them promise to route past the mill so she could check on Nathan before the worst of the weather set in. She arrived to find the mill yard empty and the bakehouse dark. Panic, sharp and unfamiliar, spiked through her chest as she ran to the mill house and pushed open the door. Nathan was sitting on the floor beside the cold oven, his face pale and his hands shaking. The smell of fear rolled off him in waves, sharp and acidic, and Jessa knew immediately what had happened even before she saw the burn on his forearm, red and blistered and badly in need of treatment. "The fire got away from me," Nathan said, his voice hoarse. "I was not paying attention and it got away from me, and for a moment I was back there in the old bakehouse and I could hear my mother screaming." Jessa knelt beside him, her hands careful as she examined the burn. It was not too serious, but it needed to be cleaned and wrapped. "Where is your medical kit?" "Shelf, above the basin." He was shaking harder now, and the fear smell was so strong it made her eyes water. She found the kit and brought it back, along with a bowl of clean water. The work of cleaning and bandaging the burn gave her something to focus on besides the way Nathan's fear was filling the small room like smoke. She had smelled fear 1,000 times from 1,000 different people, but this was different. This was someone she cared about, hurting and afraid, and she could not simply walk away when her tracking job was done. "Better?" she asked when the bandage was secure. "Yes, thank you." Nathan's breathing was starting to slow, and the fear smell was fading to something more manageable. "I am sorry you had to see that. Do not apologize." Jessa sat back on her heels watching him. "The fire took your family. Of course you are afraid of it. I thought I had learned to manage it. 5 years, Jessa. 5 years of baking 3 times a week, and I thought I was past the worst of it." "Grief does not work on a schedule," Jessa said. She hesitated, then added, "You told me once that I chose bread over fear. Maybe it is time for you to make the same choice." Nathan looked at her, confusion written plainly on his face. "You are afraid of fire," Jessa continued, working out the thought as she spoke. "So you moved away from everyone, and you bake in secret, and you sell only to the occasional traveler who happens to pass by. You have made yourself small and quiet and hidden, because that feels safer than facing the fear directly." "What else am I supposed to do?" Nathan asked, and there was an edge of frustration in his voice now, which Jessa counted as an improvement over the hollow terror from before. "Choose the bread," Jessa said. "Not the fear. Choose to bake for people again the way your mother did. Choose to open the bakehouse and let customers come. Choose to make this place something more than a hiding spot." She met his eyes. "I spent my whole life following fear because that was what I was good at. Then I smelled your bread and followed that instead, and everything changed. Maybe you need to do the same thing." Nathan was quiet for a long time, his good hand absently rubbing the bandage on his burned arm. Finally he said, "I do not know if I can." "You do not have to decide tonight," Jessa told him, "but think about it, please." She stayed for 3 days instead of returning immediately to the caravan, claiming she needed to rest before the next leg of the journey. In truth, she wanted to make sure Nathan was all right, that the burn was healing properly, and the fear smell had faded to its usual background level of old grief. They did not talk about her suggestion again, but she caught him looking at the bakehouse sometimes with an expression she could not quite read. When she finally left to rejoin the caravan, Nathan walked her to the edge of the mill yard. "Be safe," he said. "I will. And you should light the ovens again as soon as you are able. The burn will heal faster if you do not give yourself time to be afraid of the next fire." Nathan smiled slightly. "Is that medical advice or scout advice?" "Common sense," Jessa replied. And then she turned and jogged off into the winter morning, following the road north toward the caravan and the work that waited there. The job took longer than expected. Bandits were active along the north road, emboldened by the harsh winter that kept most of the garrison patrols close to their forts. Jessa spent weeks tracking small raiding parties, leading the caravan guards to their camps and watching from a distance while the humans fought and died and arrested the survivors. She was good at her work, good enough that the caravan master paid her a bonus and asked her to sign on for the return journey south. She agreed, but only if they routed past the mill again. Spring was just beginning to show itself when she finally made it back. The snow had melted except in the deepest shadows, and the stream was running high and fast with meltwater. Jessa smelled the bread from half a mile away, which was normal, but what was not normal was the number of horses she could see in the mill yard when she crested the final rise. 5 horses, which meant 5 customers, which meant Nathan was doing business with people from town. Jessa approached cautiously, unsure of her welcome with strangers present. But as she got closer, she could hear laughter from the bakehouse, actual laughter. And when she peered through the open door, she saw Nathan serving bread and butter to a group of travelers who were counting out coins and chatting with him like old friends. He looked up and saw her, and his whole face changed, brightening in a way that made Jessa's chest feel tight. "Jessa, you came back. I said I would." She stayed in the doorway, aware of the way the travelers were looking at her, the way their conversation had stopped. But the fear smell was mild, more caution than terror, and no one reached for a weapon. "Come in," Nathan said. "I want you to meet some people. These are the Dorsey brothers. They run a farm about 8 miles east. They have been buying flour from me for years, but this is the first time they have tried the bread." He looked absurdly pleased about this. The oldest Dorsey brother, a weathered man with gray in his beard, nodded to Jessa. "Your friend makes good bread. We told him he should bring it to market in town, but he says he prefers to sell it here." "For now," Nathan said, and there was something in his voice that made Jessa look at him more sharply. "I am working up to the market, but it is good practice to sell to customers who come here first." The Dorseys finished their business and left, and then it was just Jessa and Nathan in the bakehouse, with the smell of fresh bread and the sound of the stream and the warmth of the ovens filling the space between them. "You lit the fires again," Jessa said, "the day after you left." Nathan flexed his hand, showing her the burned scar that was already fading to a thin pink line. "You were right. If I gave myself time to be afraid, I would never start again. So I lit the ovens and I baked, and I have been baking ever since. And selling to people who come by. I put up a sign on the main road, pointing travelers this way if they want fresh bread. It has been busier than I expected." He paused, then added quietly, "I have been thinking about what you said, about choosing bread over fear, about making this place something more than a hiding spot." Jessa waited, sensing there was more he wanted to say. "There is a market fair in town next month," Nathan continued. "Anyone can rent a stall and sell their goods. I am thinking about taking a stall and selling bread there, just for the one day to see how it goes." "That is a good idea," Jessa said carefully, not wanting to push too hard but desperately hoping he would follow through. "Will you come with me?" Nathan asked. "I know it is a lot to ask, and I know people will stare, but I would feel better if you were there. You smell fear from a mile away." "You will know if there is trouble before I do." Jessa's throat felt tight again, the same feeling she had gotten when he first invited her to stay in the shed. "Yes, I will come." The month passed quickly. Jessa took small jobs close to the mill, nothing that would keep her away for more than a few days at a time. She helped Nathan experiment with new recipes, testing different types of bread and sweet rolls, and even a few meat pies that turned out surprisingly well. They built crates for transporting the baked goods safely, and Nathan stitched a banner from canvas and paint that read "Czar Mill Bakery" in neat letters. The night before the market fair, they stayed up late loading the crates into the small cart Nathan had borrowed from the Dorsey brothers. The moon was nearly full, bright enough to work by, and Jessa could smell Nathan's nervousness mixing with something else, something that might have been excitement. "Are you afraid?" she asked as they secured the last crate. "Terrified," Nathan admitted, "but also ready. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense," Jessa said. They left before dawn, walking alongside the cart as it creaked and rattled along the road toward town. Jessa had not been to this particular town before, but she had been to enough others to know what to expect. Stares, whispers, people crossing to the other side of the street to avoid getting too close. She wore her best clothes and left her weapons behind except for a small knife at her belt, trying to look as non-threatening as possible. The market square was already busy when they arrived, farmers and craftspeople setting up their stalls in the early morning light. Nathan found the space he had rented, a corner spot with good visibility, and they began unloading the crates. Jessa could feel people watching them, could smell the mix of curiosity and caution and occasional fear that drifted over from the neighboring stalls. "Just ignore them," Nathan murmured as he arranged the loaves in neat rows. "They will get used to you." But it was Nathan they were staring at, Jessa realized. Nathan, who had not been to town in 5 years, who had vanished after the fire and become something of a ghost story among the locals. The orc was strange, yes, but the miller's return was the real news. The first customers came as the sun cleared the rooftops. A young woman with a baby on her hip, an old man who walked with a cane, a trio of children sent with their mother's coins to buy breakfast. Nathan served them all with quiet efficiency, and Jessa stood to the side, watching and smelling and ready to act if trouble came. But no trouble came. People bought bread. They complimented the quality. They asked when Nathan would be back at the next market, and he told them he was thinking about making it a regular thing, maybe every month to start. A tall woman with gray streaked hair stopped in front of the stall around mid-morning, and Jessa smelled the spike of grief and recognition that came off Nathan before she even registered who the woman was. "Nathan Czar," the woman said softly. "I heard you were back. I did not believe it." "Hello, Aunt Meredith." Nathan's hands were shaking slightly as he wiped them on his apron. "It has been a long time. 5 years." The woman's eyes were damp. 5 years since the fire, since we buried Lily and your mother, since you sold everything and disappeared." "I am sorry," Nathan said. "I could not stay, not after." "I know." Meredith reached across the stall and took his hand, squeezing it tightly. "I know, but I am glad you are here now. Your mother would be proud of this bread. She would be proud of you." They talked for a few minutes, awkward and emotional, and then Meredith bought 6 loaves and promised to come back next month. When she left, Nathan had to sit down on a crate for a moment, breathing hard. "That was brave," Jessa said quietly. "That was terrifying," Nathan corrected, but he was smiling slightly. The day wore on. They sold every loaf they had brought, and Nathan took orders for the next market. By the time the sun was setting and the other vendors were packing up, Jessa could see the exhaustion in the line of Nathan's shoulders, but also something else. Satisfaction, maybe. The sense of a job well done. They walked back to the mill in the twilight, the empty cart rattling behind them. Nathan was quiet, but it was a comfortable quiet, the kind that came from being too tired to talk but content enough not to need to. "Thank you," he said finally, as the mill came into view. "For coming with me. For standing there all day even though people were staring. For believing I could do this." "You did it yourself," Jessa pointed out. "I just watched. You did more than watch. You chose bread over fear, and you made me believe I could do the same." Nathan stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression serious in the fading light. "I think I have been half alive since the fire. Going through the motions, baking because I had to, hiding because it was easier than facing everything I had lost. And then you showed up, following the smell of bread instead of fear, and everything started to change." Jessa's heart was beating too fast. "Nathan." "I am not good at this," Nathan interrupted. "At talking about feelings or being honest about what I want, but I want you to know that you are welcome here, not just as someone who helps with the work or someone who buys bread. As someone I care about, as someone I want to keep around if you want to stay." "I want to stay," Jessa said, the words coming out before she could think about them. "I have wanted to stay since the first day I smelled your bread and followed it here." Nathan smiled, real and warm and completely unafraid. "Then stay." So she did. Summer came, and with it a steady rhythm of work and rest and slow, careful courtship. Nathan went to the market fair every month, and Jessa went with him, and gradually the stares faded into acceptance. The Dorsey brothers started bringing their families to buy bread, and Aunt Meredith became a regular customer, and word spread that Czar Mill Bakery made the best bread in the region. But success brought its own problems. By midsummer, bandits had noticed the increased traffic on the road to the mill. They were not the organized raiding parties Jessa had tracked for the caravans, just desperate men looking for easy targets, but they were dangerous enough. The first attack came on a Thursday evening, just as Nathan was closing up the bakehouse. Jessa smelled them before she saw them, the sharp stink of fear and desperation mixed with the sour note of men who had not bathed in weeks. She grabbed Nathan's arm and pulled him back into the mill house just as three figures emerged from the tree line. "Give us your coin," the leader called. He was young, barely grown, with a cheap sword that looked like it had been stolen from a blacksmith's scrap pile. "And your food. We know you sell to travelers. You must have plenty." "I have a little coin," Nathan called back, his voice steady even though Jessa could smell the fear starting to rise from him. "Take it and go. I do not want trouble." "We will take what we want," the bandit leader said, and his companions laughed, a sound that had no humor in it. Jessa stepped out from behind Nathan, her bow in hand and an arrow already nocked. She had not wanted to bring weapons, had not wanted to be seen as a threat, but she kept her gear in the shed for emergencies, and this qualified. The bandits saw her and froze. The fierce smell spiked so sharply it made her nostrils flare. "An orc," one of them whispered. "Leave now," Jessa said calmly. "Go back to wherever you came from and do not return. If you do, I will track you down and turn you over to the garrison. I can smell your fear from here. I will be able to smell it from miles away, wherever you go." The leader tried to rally his courage, taking a half-step forward with his sword raised. Jessa drew the bow back smoothly, the arrow aimed at the center of his chest, and the young man's nerve broke. He turned and ran, his companions scrambling after him, and within seconds they had vanished back into the trees. Jessa lowered the bow slowly, listening to the crash of their retreat fade into the distance. When she turned back to Nathan, he was staring at her with an expression she could not read. "I am sorry," she said. "I know you wanted this place to be peaceful, but I could not let them hurt you." "Hurt me?" Nathan shook his head, almost laughing. "Jessa, you just saved my life and probably everything I have worked for. Why would you apologize for that?" "Because I am what I am," Jessa said quietly. "An orc with weapons, scaring humans away. I know how that looks." Nathan crossed the distance between them and took her free hand in both of his. "It looks like someone I care about protecting the home we are building together. It looks like bravery." "It looks like love," Jessa's breath caught. "Love? Yes." Nathan said it simply, the same way he said everything else, like it was just a fact that did not need embellishing. "I love you. I have loved you since you showed up in my bakehouse following the smell of bread. I have loved you through every loaf we have shared, through every conversation and comfortable silence, through every time you chose to come back here instead of taking a job somewhere else. And I love you now, standing here with a bow in your hand, ready to defend this place with everything you have." Jessa set the bow down carefully, her hands shaking slightly. "I love you too. I did not know how to say it. I am not good at human courtship, at knowing what is appropriate or when to speak. But yes, I love you." They stood together in the mill yard, holding hands while the last light faded from the sky and the stream ran over its rocks, and the mill wheel turned steadily on. It was not a grand romantic moment, no dramatic declarations or passionate embraces. Just two people acknowledging what had been growing between them since the day Jessa had followed the smell of bread instead of fear. "We should tell the garrison about the bandits," Nathan said eventually, "before they come back with more men." "I will go tomorrow," Jessa agreed. "But tonight, I think we should bar the doors and windows, just in case." They secured the mill house and bakehouse, checking every entrance and making sure the shutters were latched. Then they ate a simple supper of bread and cheese and the last of the summer berries, sitting close together at the small table while night settled in around them. "What happens now?" Nathan asked. "Now we make sure this place is defensible," Jessa said. "The bandits will talk. Others will hear that there is money and food here, and some of them will be desperate or foolish enough to try their luck. We need to be ready." Nathan nodded slowly. "What do you suggest?" "First, we tell the garrison and make sure they know this road needs patrols." Second, we make it clear to anyone who comes here that this place is protected. And third, Jessa hesitated, then continued. Third, we find other people who would benefit from a safe, well-defended mill. Homesteaders, farmers, families who need a place to bring their grain and buy their bread without worrying about being robbed on the way. If we can build a community here, we will all be safer. A community, Nathan repeated, turning the idea over in his mind. I came here to be alone. But I think I am ready for something different now. They talked late into the night, planning and dreaming, and when they finally went to their separate beds, Jessa in her shed and Nathan in his small room, the mill felt different. Less like a hiding place, and more like the beginning of something larger. The garrison sent a patrol the next day after Jessa reported the attempted robbery. The captain was a gruff man who looked at Jessa with suspicion, but listened to her account and agreed to increase patrols on the road to the mill. He also suggested that Nathan hire permanent guards if he was going to continue attracting customers, but Nathan politely declined. I have the best tracker in the region living in my shed, he told the captain. I think that is protection enough. The captain looked dubious but did not argue. After the patrol left, Jessa and Nathan sat down to discuss their next steps. We need to make the mill house more defensible, Jessa said, sketching a rough diagram in the dirt of the mill yard. Stronger doors, shutters that can be barred from inside, maybe a bell or horn to raise an alarm if trouble comes. And we should clear the tree line back another 20 yards so no one can approach without being seen. That is a lot of work, Nathan observed. Then we should hire help. Pay the Dorsey brothers or some of the other farmers to assist. It will show people that we are serious about making this a safe place. Over the following weeks, they did exactly that. The Dorseys brought their sons and nephews, strong young men who were happy to work for good wages and fresh bread. They reinforced the doors, installed heavy shutters, cleared the tree line, and even dug a shallow ditch around the perimeter of the mill yard that would slow anyone trying to approach quickly. More people started coming to the mill. Not just to buy bread or grind flour, but to socialize, to trade news, to rest on the long road between the larger settlements. Nathan began baking extra every day, knowing that there would be customers. Jessa took on the role of unofficial guardian, watching the road and tracking anyone who seemed suspicious. The bandits came back once, a larger group this time, emboldened by desperation and rumors of easy pickings. But Jessa smelled them coming from a mile away, and by the time they reached the mill, Nathan had rung the alarm bell and the Dorsey brothers had arrived with their hunting bows. The bandits took one look at the defended position and melted back into the woods without a fight. After that, word spread that the Czar mill was not worth the trouble. The attacks stopped, and the road became safer. Families started building homesteads closer to the mill, knowing it was a reliable place to trade and buy supplies. By autumn, there were 6 new farms within easy walking distance, and talk of petitioning the regional governor to recognize the mill as an official settlement. Nathan and Jessa watched it all unfold with a mixture of pride and disbelief. What had started as one man's refuge and one orc woman's search for peace had become something neither of them had planned, but both of them wanted. One evening in late autumn, as they sat outside watching the leaves fall from the trees, Nathan said, "I want to ask you something." Jessa looked at him, noting the nervous smell that had crept into his scent. Not fear exactly, but something close to it. "What?" "I want you to marry me," Nathan said. "I know it is complicated. I know there will be people who do not approve, who will say that humans and orcs should not marry. But I do not care what they say. I care about you, and I care about the life we are building here, and I want to make it official." Jessa's heart was beating so hard she could hear it in her ears. Marriage is a human custom. So is baking bread, but you seem to enjoy that well enough, Nathan pointed out. If you do not want to, I will understand, but I am asking. Yes, Jessa said. Yes, I will marry you. Nathan's face broke into a wide smile, and he pulled her close, kissing her with a tenderness that made her forget everything except the warmth of his mouth, and the way his hands cradled her face like she was something precious. When they pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard, and Jessa could smell happiness on him, pure and uncomplicated. When? She asked. Spring, Nathan suggested. After the winter, when the roads are clear and people can travel for the ceremony, I want everyone to see. I want it to be a celebration, not something we hide. Spring, Jessa agreed. They told Aunt Meredith first the next time she came to buy bread. The older woman looked between them, her eyes shrewd, and then nodded slowly. You are sure about this? Both of you? Completely, Nathan said. Meredith looked at Jessa. And you know what you are signing up for. The stares, the gossip, the people who will refuse to do business with you because you married an orc. I know, Nathan said before Jessa could answer. And I do not care. Let them stare. Let them gossip. Jessa is the best thing that has happened to me since the fire, and I am not going to hide that because some people are small-minded. Meredith's stern expression softened into something that might have been approval. Your mother would have liked her, she said quietly. She always said you needed someone strong enough to match you. I think you found that person. The winter was long and cold, but Jessa and Nathan weathered it together, baking bread and feeding the small but growing community that had formed around the mill. They made plans for the wedding, simple plans, because neither of them wanted anything elaborate. A ceremony in the mill yard, a feast with bread and roasted meat, and whatever vegetables could be stored through the winter. Music from the Dorsey brothers who played fiddle and pipe when they had time. Word of the wedding spread, and with it came questions and challenges. A priest from the town refused to officiate, saying he would not sanctify a union between human and orc. But the Dorseys knew a traveling cleric who believed that love was love regardless of species, and she agreed to perform the ceremony for a modest fee and all the bread she could carry. A group of townspeople tried to organize a protest, claiming that allowing such a marriage would bring shame on the region. But the protest fizzled when the protesters realized they would have to walk 8 miles in the mud to reach the mill, and most of them decided their outrage was not worth the effort. Through it all, Jessa and Nathan stayed focused on what mattered. The mill, the bakehouse, the people who depended on them, and each other. Spring arrived with a burst of wildflowers and warm rain that swelled the stream and set the mill wheel turning faster. The wedding was set for the first clear Saturday, and Jessa woke that morning to find the mill yard already full of people. The Dorsey family, Aunt Meredith, a dozen other farmers and homesteaders who had become regulars over the past year. Even the garrison captain had come, looking uncomfortable but determined to show his respect. Nathan was in the mill house, getting ready with the help of his aunt. Jessa stayed in the shed, putting on the new dress she had bought in town, a simple green garment that matched her skin and made her feel less like a scout and more like a bride. Her hands were shaking as she fastened the ties, and she had to stop and breathe deeply, sorting through the smells that drifted through the open door. Excitement from the guests. Wood smoke from the cooking fires where the feast was being prepared. Fresh bread from the bakehouse, because Nathan had insisted on baking for his own wedding. And underneath it all, Nathan's scent, familiar and beloved, carrying only the faintest trace of nerves. The ceremony was short and sweet. The traveling cleric spoke about love and commitment, and the courage it took to build a life together in a world that was not always kind. Nathan and Jessa exchanged vows they had written themselves, simple promises to stand together through whatever came, to choose bread over fear, to make their home a place of peace for anyone who needed it. When the cleric pronounced them married, Nathan kissed Jessa in front of everyone, and the gathered crowd cheered. Some of the cheers were probably more for the novelty than the romance, but Jessa did not care. She was married to the man she loved, surrounded by people who had accepted them both, and the smell of fresh bread filled the air like a blessing. The feast lasted into the evening. There was music and dancing, and Jessa learned that humans had very specific ideas about how wedding dances should go. Nathan was patient with her clumsiness, laughing when she stepped on his feet and spinning her in circles until they were both dizzy. As the sun set and the guests began to drift home, Jessa and Nathan stood together in the mill yard, watching the last of the light fade from the sky. The mill wheel turned steadily, the stream ran over its rocks, and the bakehouse chimney sent up a thin stream of smoke that carried the scent of bread into the twilight. "Happy?" Nathan asked. "Very," Jessa said. "You, more than I thought possible." He wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her close. "Thank you for following the smell of bread instead of fear. Thank you for choosing this place. Thank you for choosing me." "Thank you for not being afraid," Jessa replied. "Thank you for seeing me as something other than a monster. Thank you for giving me a home." They stood together until the stars came out, two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built something beautiful out of grief and loneliness, and the simple act of sharing bread. The years that followed were good ones. The settlement around the mill grew steadily, attracting homesteaders and craftspeople who valued the safety and community that Nathan and Jessa had fostered. The mill became a regional hub, known for its excellent flour and even better bread. Nathan trained 2 apprentices, young people from the settlement who wanted to learn the baker's trade, and Jessa took on the role of settlement scout, keeping the roads safe and tracking down trouble before it could reach the families who lived there. They faced challenges, of course. A bad harvest one year that strained everyone's resources. A sickness that swept through the settlement and took 3 of the elderly residents. Occasional travelers who brought their prejudices with them and had to be firmly shown the door. But they faced those challenges together, and with the support of the community they had built. And through it all, the bakehouse kept producing bread, and Jessa kept following its scent home whenever her work took her away. 3 years after the wedding, Jessa realized she was pregnant. The discovery came as a shock, not because she and Nathan had not talked about children, but because she had not been sure it was possible for humans and orcs to have children together. Apparently it was. Nathan was thrilled in his quiet way, immediately beginning to plan for the changes a baby would bring. They converted part of the mill house into a nursery, and Jessa reluctantly scaled back her scouting work, taking only jobs close to home. Their daughter was born on a warm summer evening, with Aunt Meredith serving as midwife and Nathan pacing anxious circles in the mill yard until he heard the baby's first cry. They named her Faye, and she had her mother's green skin and small tusks, and her father's dark eyes and quick smile. Faye grew up in the bakehouse, learning to knead dough before she could write her name, helping her father tend the ovens and learning from her mother how to read the scents on the wind. She was the first of what would eventually be a small crowd of half-orc children born in the settlement, proof that the barriers between species could be crossed with love and courage. When Faye was 3, Jessa gave birth to a second daughter, Willa, who had more human features but the same fierce spirit as her sister. The 2 girls were inseparable, trailing after their parents through the mill and bakehouse, asking endless questions and getting into the kind of trouble that came from being bright and curious and entirely fearless. Nathan proved to be a patient, loving father, the kind who could explain how yeast worked for the 10th time without losing his temper, who baked special birthday cakes and told bedtime stories about brave bakers who fought dragons with nothing but fresh bread and determination. Jessa taught the girls to track and scout, to read the forest and understand its dangers, to be strong and smart and unafraid. The settlement continued to grow. What had started as a mill and a bakehouse became a proper village, with a general store and a blacksmith and a small schoolhouse where the children could learn to read and write. The regional governor officially recognized the settlement and gave it a name, Czar's Ford, after the mill and the family that had founded it. People came from all over to see the place where a human and an orc had built a life together, where half-orc children played in the streets without fear, where the smell of fresh bread meant safety and home. Some came with prejudice, ready to condemn what they saw. But most left with a different perspective, having seen proof that love could bridge any divide. Nathan and Jessa grew older together, their dark hair turning gray, their faces gaining the lines that came from years of smiling and squinting into the sun and working hard. The bakehouse changed hands as Nathan's apprentices became masters in their own right, though Nathan himself never entirely retired, always finding excuses to slip into the bakehouse and bake a few loaves just to keep his hand in. Jessa's tracking days were mostly behind her, but she still walked the perimeter of the settlement every morning, her nose testing the wind for any hint of trouble. The villagers had learned to trust her gift, and children would run up to ask her what she could smell, delighted when she told them she could smell their excitement about the upcoming festival, or their nervousness about starting school, or their happiness when their parents came home from a long journey. On a spring morning when Jessa was in her 50s, she woke to the smell of fresh bread drifting through the window of the bedroom she shared with Nathan. She smiled and stretched, her joints creaking slightly with age, and padded barefoot into the kitchen to find Nathan already up and dressed, buttering a loaf that was still steaming from the oven. "You are baking again," she observed. "I am always baking," Nathan corrected, handing her half the loaf. "But today is special. Today is the anniversary of the day you followed the smell of my bread instead of following fear." Jessa took the bread and bit into it, savoring the familiar taste that had been the beginning of everything. 23 years. 23 years, Nathan agreed, and I still think it is the best thing that ever happened to me. They ate their bread in the comfortable silence of two people who had spent decades learning each other's rhythms. Outside, the village was beginning to wake, smoke rising from chimneys, children's voices calling to each other, the mill wheel turning steadily as it had for all those years. "You ever regret it?" Nathan asked suddenly. "Giving up your life as a scout? Settling down here instead of traveling the world?" Jessa considered the question seriously, the way she considered everything. "No. I thought I wanted to wander, but what I really wanted was a place where I belonged. You gave me that. This place gave me that. I have never regretted following the smell of your bread, Nathan. Not once." Nathan smiled, the expression lighting his whole face the way it still did even after all these years. "Good. Because I have never regretted the day you appeared in my bakehouse doorway, looking dangerous and lost and entirely captivating. I was not looking for compliments. I know, but you are getting them anyway." He took her hand, his fingers warm and familiar. "I love you, Jessa Czar. Today and always." "I love you too," Jessa said, squeezing his hand. They sat together as the sun rose higher, filling the kitchen with golden light, and the smell of bread filled the air like it always had, like it always would. The village around them hummed with life. The mill turned, the stream ran over its rocks, and two people who had chosen bread over fear sat together and counted their blessings. Later that day, their daughters came to visit with their own families. Faye had married a human blacksmith and had two children, a boy and a girl who were already showing signs of their grandmother's tracking gift. Willa had chosen a different path, training as a healer and traveling between settlements to bring medicine to those who needed it, but she always came home for important occasions. The family gathered in the mill yard for a celebration feast, just like they had for the wedding all those years ago. There was bread, of course, fresh from the ovens and still warm, along with roasted meat and vegetables from the garden and berry pies that Faye had made using her grandmother Meredith's recipe. As the afternoon wore on, Jessa found herself standing at the edge of the gathering, watching her family laugh and eat and live. Nathan came to stand beside her, slipping his hand into hers without a word. "We did well," Jessa said quietly. "We did," Nathan agreed. "Better than I ever dreamed when I was hiding out here alone, too afraid to light the ovens without shaking. You were never a coward, you were just hurting. Maybe, but you helped me heal. You helped me choose the bread." Jessa leaned against him, breathing in his familiar scent, the smell of bread and safety and home. "And you helped me find a place where I did not have to follow fear anymore, where I could follow peace instead." They stood together as the sun set over the village, over the mill and the bakehouse and the life they had built from nothing but courage and love, and the simple act of sharing bread with a stranger. The smell of baking filled the air, carrying on the wind to travelers on the road, to farmers in their fields, to anyone who needed to know that somewhere in the world, there was a place where fear did not rule, where differences were celebrated, where an orc woman and a human man had proven that love could overcome anything. And in that moment, surrounded by family and friends, with the mill wheel turning and the stream running and the bread rising in the ovens, Jessa Czar knew that she had found exactly what she had been searching for all those years ago when she followed the smell of fresh bread instead of the smell of fear. She had found home,